You know what finally convinced me to pay attention to the old shipwright tools? I was standing in a maritime museum in Maine about 6 years ago, looking at a display case full of hand tools that had been pulled from a shipyard that closed down in 1892. And every single one of those tools looked like it had been used hard, real hard, but they were still in working condition. The handles were worn smooth from decades of hands gripping them. The steel still had an edge you could shave with. And I remember thinking, these men built entire ships with nothing but hand tools, vessels that crossed oceans and survived storms that would tear apart anything I have ever built. And they did it faster and more precisely than most of us can work with all our modern power tools and jigs. That got me curious. I started reading about traditional shipwright methods, visiting working boatyards, talking to the few people left who still build wooden boats by hand. And what I discovered completely changed the way I think about hand tools. Today, I'm going to walk you through 15 essential shipwright hand tools that every woodworker should know about, tools that were perfected over centuries of hard use and that still outperform modern alternatives for certain tasks. Plus, stick around to the end because I have a bonus tip about how shipwrights tuned one specific tool that will change the way you approach curved work forever. Let me get into it. Most woodworkers today have never set foot on a working wooden boat, and that is perfectly fine. But here is why shipwright tools matter to you even if you never plan to build anything that floats. Shipwrights were solving the hardest problems in woodworking. They were shaping massive timbers, cutting complex compound curves, fitting joints that had to stay watertight under enormous stress, and doing all of it with hand tools in open-air shipyards. The tools they developed were not fancy. They were brutally practical, and once you understand what each one does and why it was designed that way, you start to see gaps in your own toolkit that you never knew existed. The tradition I have been studying most closely comes from the British and Scandinavian shipyards of the 17th through 19th centuries. These were the shipyards that built everything from fishing smacks to warships, and the men who worked in them were among the most skilled woodworkers who ever lived. They were not artists in the romantic sense. They were tradesmen who got paid by the job and had to work fast and accurate, or they did not eat. Their toolkits reflected that. Every tool earned its place. Nothing was there for show. And what is remarkable is how many of those tools translate directly to furniture making, timber framing, and general shop work if you know how to use them. Let me start with the one tool that defines shipwright work more than any other: the adze. If you have never used an adze, you are missing out on one of the most satisfying and efficient shaping tools ever invented. A shipwright's adze has a curved blade set perpendicular to the handle, and you swing it between your feet to shape timber. I know that sounds terrifying the first time you hear it, and honestly, the first time I tried it, I was nervous. But once you get the rhythm, an adze removes material faster than any other hand tool I have ever used. Shipwrights use them to shape keels, flatten planking stock, and fair curves on frames. The blade is typically about 4.5 inches wide with a gentle sweep, and the handle runs about 32 inches long. For a modern woodworker, an adze is unbeatable for shaping chair seats, sculpting large surfaces, and roughing out curves on big timbers. The key is keeping that edge razor sharp and letting the weight of the head do the work. You are guiding it, not forcing it. The second tool is the broad axe, and this is the one that most people confuse with a regular hewing axe. A shipwright's broad axe has a flat back on one side and a beveled edge on the other, and it is designed to hew a flat surface on a log or timber. The flat back rides along the surface you are creating, which acts as a built-in guide. Shipwrights use these to square up keel timbers and create flat faces on curved frames. The blade runs about 12 inches wide, and the handle has a distinctive offset, canted away from the flat side so your knuckles clear the work. When I first tried hewing with a proper broadaxe, I was stunned at how flat the surface came out. We are talking about a hand tool producing a surface that rivals a jointer on rough stock. For modern shop work, a broadaxe is extraordinary for breaking down large slabs and timbers before they go to your machines. Now, the draw knife. Most woodworkers have at least seen a draw knife, but shipwrights use theirs differently than most of us do. A shipwright's draw knife typically has a blade about 10 inches long, with handles angled slightly downward, and they used it bevel up for heavy removal and bevel down for fine finishing cuts. The difference in control is remarkable. Bevel down, you can take shavings so thin they are almost transparent, which is exactly what you want when you're fairing a plank to fit against a curved hull frame. I started using my draw knife bevel down for fine work after watching a boat builder in Nova Scotia, and it completely changed the tool for me. If you already own a draw knife, try flipping it over. You will be amazed at the difference. By the way, if you are enjoying learning about these shipwright methods, I put together something I think you will really appreciate. It is called Secrets of the Shipyard, and it covers 16 chapters of Viking and naval carpentry techniques that most woodworkers have never seen. 150 pages of real hands-on knowledge. You can grab your copy by scanning the QR code on screen, or just use the first link in the description. All right, let us keep going. The fourth tool is one you might not expect, the spoke shave. Now, I know most woodworkers associate spoke shaves with chair making, and that is fair. But shipwrights were using spoke shaves long before Windsor chairmakers adopted them. In the shipyard, a spoke shave was the finishing tool for any curved surface, from oar shafts to tiller handles to the rounded edges of deck planking. Shipwright spoke shaves were typically heavier than what you find in most catalogs today, with a thicker iron and a wider sole that helped bridge undulations in the surface. If you are buying a spoke shave for general curved work, look for one with a sole at least 1 3/4 inches wide and an iron that is at least 1/8 of an inch thick. The extra mass makes a real difference in how smoothly it cuts. Number 5 is the caulking iron. Now, this is a tool most woodworkers will never need, but understanding what it does teaches you something important about how shipwrights thought about joints. A caulking iron is a flat-bladed chisel, usually about 3/16 of an inch thick at the working edge, and it is used to drive oakum or cotton into the seams between hull planks to make them watertight. The thing that fascinated me is the precision involved. Shipwrights did not just jam material into a crack. They cut specific caulking bevels into the edges of each plank before installation, usually about 1/8 of an inch deep at the outboard face, tapering to nothing at the inboard face. That bevel created a precise channel for the caulking material. The lesson for modern woodworkers is this: when you are designing a joint, think about what that joint needs to do over time, not just at the moment of assembly. Shipwrights designed their joints to accommodate movement, seasonal wood expansion, and future maintenance. That is thinking we should all adopt. The sixth tool is the auger, specifically the Shipwright's twist auger. These were massive boring tools, some with bits over 2 inches in diameter, used to drill bolt holes through multiple layers of heavy timber. The handles were typically T-shaped and about 18 inches across, so 2 men could turn them together on the big ones. What impressed me most about Shipwright augers is how cleanly they cut. A good twist auger leaves a hole with smooth walls and a flat bottom, which matters when you are seating a bolt or a tree nail. For modern woodworkers, a quality hand auger is still the best tool for boring large holes in timber framework or anywhere you need a clean hole and do not have access to power. Tool number 7 is the rebate plane, which shipwrights called a rabbet plane. These were used constantly in shipyard work for cutting the rabbet along the keel where the garboard plank sits, and for fitting planks to each other. A shipwright's rabbet plane is wider and heavier than most modern versions, typically with a 2-inch wide iron and a skewed blade that slices across the grain more cleanly. I picked up a vintage Shipwright's rabbet plane at a tool sale a few years ago, and the difference between it and my standard number 78 was immediately obvious. The mass and the skewed iron just produce a cleaner cut with less effort. If you do a lot of rabbet work, finding one of these old planes is worth the search. Number 8 is the mallet, and not just any mallet. Shipwright mallets were made from lignum vitae, one of the densest and most self-lubricating woods on Earth. A lignum vitae mallet drives a chisel with authority because all that weight is concentrated in a compact head. These mallets rarely split or chip because the interlocking grain of lignum vitae is almost impossible to fracture. I have been using a lignum vitae mallet for about 4 years now, and it has completely replaced my old beech mallet. The feel is different. Every strike is solid and controlled. You can find lignum vitae turning blanks from specialty wood dealers, and turning your own mallet on a lathe is a satisfying afternoon project. The 9th tool is the bevel gauge, But shipwrights did not use just one. A working shipwright might carry 6 or 8 bevel gauges set to different angles, each one locked to a specific bevel that repeated throughout the vessel. This is a habit worth stealing. Instead of constantly resetting one bevel gauge, dedicate inexpensive bevel gauges to the angles you use most often. I keep 3 bevel gauges set permanently in my shop, one at 22.5 degrees for dovetails, one at 14 degrees for sliding dovetails, and one at 8 degrees for through tenon wedges. It saves time and eliminates errors. Tool number 10 is the hand saw, specifically the Shipwright's crosscut saw. These were longer than typical shop saws, usually about 28 inches, with about 7 teeth per inch, and a heavy blade that tracked straight through thick stock. Shipwrights needed to crosscut heavy planking quickly and accurately, and their saws reflected that. The teeth were filed with significant fleam, about 15 degrees, which gave them an aggressive slicing action across the grain. If you work with thick hardwood stock, a properly sharpened crosscut saw with heavy-set teeth will outperform most modern panel saws. Number 11 is the marking knife. Shipwrights used a single bevel marking knife with a flat back, very similar to what Japanese woodworkers use. The flat back registers against a straight edge or template, and the beveled edge scores a precise line in the wood. This is superior to a pencil line in every way, because the scored line creates a tiny wall that your chisel or saw can register against. If you are still marking joints with a pencil, switching to a marking knife will immediately improve your accuracy. 12 is the scrub plane. Before thickness planers existed, shipwrights used scrub planes to rapidly remove material from rough stock. A scrub plane has a narrow iron, usually about 1¼ inches wide, ground with a pronounced camber or curve. That curved edge takes a deep, scalloped cut that removes wood quickly without jamming. For modern woodworkers who enjoy working rough lumber by hand, a scrub plane is the first tool you reach for. It takes rough sawn stock down to near finished thickness faster than you would believe. Tool 13 is the slick, which is essentially a giant chisel with a blade between 2.5 and 4 inches wide and a handle about 2 feet long. You do not hit a slick with a mallet. You push it with your body weight, using both hands and sometimes your shoulder. Shipwrights used slicks for paring large joints, cleaning up adze work, and trimming planks to final fit. The long handle gives you tremendous control because small hand movements translate to very thin shavings. A slick is one of those tools that once you use it, you wonder how you ever got along without it for large joinery work. Number 14 is the clenching iron, a simple but clever tool. It is a heavy block of iron that you hold behind a piece of timber while someone drives a nail or bolt through from the other side. The nail hits the clenching iron and curls back on itself, locking it permanently in place. This is the oldest and most reliable mechanical fastening method in wooden boat building, and it works just as well for heavy construction projects today. And 15 is the boring machine, or breast brace. This is a heavy-duty brace with a curved pad at the top that you lean into with your chest. The leverage from your body weight lets you bore holes through thick timbers that would exhaust you with a standard brace. Shipwrights use these daily for bolt holes and treenail holes, and a good breast brace can bore a 1-inch hole through 8 inches of white oak in under a minute. Let me share some patterns I have noticed over the years, things I used to do myself that shipwrights handle completely differently. The first pattern is reaching for power tools by default. Most of us flip on the router or the planer without even considering whether a hand tool would be faster for that specific task. Shipwrights had no choice, but what they discovered is that for many operations, especially shaping and fitting, a sharp hand tool is actually quicker because there is no setup time, no jig building, and no dust collection to fuss with. The second pattern is owning one of everything instead of multiples of what you actually use. I used to have one bevel gauge, one marking gauge, one chisel of each size. Shipwrights kept multiples of their most used tools, each one set up for a specific task. Once I started doing this, my workflow got noticeably faster. The third pattern is undervaluing tool weight. Modern hand tools trend lighter and lighter, but shipwrights knew that mass in a cutting tool translates directly to control and efficiency. A heavier plane, a heavier mallet, a heavier chisel, they all cut better with less effort from you because momentum does the work. The fourth pattern is neglecting sharpening. Shipwrights sharpened constantly. Not because they were obsessive, but because a sharp tool is faster, safer, and produces better results. If you are sharpening your edge tools once a week, try sharpening every 30 minutes of active use. The difference is transformative. Now for that bonus tip I promised at the beginning. This comes directly from watching a boat builder fare a whole plank, and it changed how I use a spoke shave on any curved surface. Instead of pushing the spoke shave along the curve, the way most of us do, he skewed it about 30 degrees to the direction of travel. That skewing action turns the cutting geometry into something closer to a slicing cut, rather than a scraping cut. The shavings came off like ribbons, and the surface was flawless. He told me that every shipwright learns this in the first week on the job, but I have never seen it taught in any woodworking book or video aimed at furniture makers. Try it next time you're working a curved edge. Skew the spoke shave about 30 degrees and take a light pass. You will feel the difference immediately in how smoothly the blade enters the wood and how much less tear out you get, especially on figured grain. Before we wrap up, if today's video taught you something new, imagine having 16 chapters of techniques like this at your fingertips. That is exactly what Secrets of the Shipyard is. It is my collection of Viking and naval carpentry secrets from the world's greatest traditional shipwrights, all in one place, with 25 hand-drawn illustrations and 150 pages of clear instructions. You can get your copy by scanning the QR code on screen or using the link in the description. Thanks for being here. Subscribe if you have not yet, and I will see you next time.